maybe actually going to compete in these markets where nobody else is really looking or no one's excited is actually the opportunity. I actually don't care that much about what are the financial results on a day-to-day basis. If we help people get these jobs, keep them informed, keep them trained, do all these things, the money will come. We have a couple of crises in America. One is a financial education crisis, one's a hard work crisis, and one's a leadership crisis. You can actually solve two of the three of those by simply just working hard and actually leading by example. People just get on the internet and they're just bitching about anything that possibly goes wrong in their life. The early warning sign of socialism is complaining. We have absolutely become a nation of complainers. And then what ends up happening is the people in charge are like, dude, we're tired of hearing these people complain, just give them shit. Right? And when you give them shit, it turns into socialism. Take away the incentive, you can completely screw up entire economies and nations by doing that. I tend to think that actually we need to shift back to being a nation of competitors. Stop complaining, start competing, and let's get on with it.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Pomp. So nice to have you. You're super close here in Miami with us in Coconut Grove. So appreciate you coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to kind of just jump right into it. So I didn't even know you were in the Army for how many, 7 years?
6.5 years.
6.5 years? Yeah. Like what was kind of that, your story in terms of like, how'd you get into the Army and then the big pivot into crypto?
So I was in high school, graduated a semester early from college or from high school, was going to go to college in kind of the spring of my senior year. Ended up not doing that. Instead enrolled in the Army, signed a contract that would let me go to school and have kind of Army reserve duty until I graduated. Then I would go active. In hindsight, joining the Army was probably one of the best things I ever did, right? I was already pretty disciplined. I was pretty ambitious, all the things that kind of would make you either want to sign up for the Army or be successful in the business world, whatever. But it really kind of hammered home, I think, two things for me. One is like, there's like this understanding of mortality that comes, especially if you get deployed and things like that. And so at a very young age, it was like, oh shit, I see the end. Right. And so, okay, between now and the end, I just want to enjoy my life and kind of do all this, really fun, cool stuff that's fulfilling for me. But like, I'm not confusing that I have forever. And so it really set me on a path to like just do a lot of things, which I'm grateful for. And then the second thing was it basically showed me just like how much stress you can endure, how hard you can work, and kind of how to, in my mind, like operate. And so when you get pushed to the extreme in these situations, like everything else seems pretty easy. So one of the things that's always funny is like if you talk to combat veterans who went to Iraq or Afghanistan over the last 20 years or so in the business world, people are like, why aren't you stressed? And like a joke is almost like, well, no one's shooting at me. Right. Yeah. And so like, it's kind of this weird thing where once you get to the extreme, anything that doesn't actually put you in that extreme situation seems easier. Now, it doesn't mean that you make all the right decisions. Doesn't mean that, you never are stressed. It's just like you have this baseline of no, real stress is something else. And so I think that's been a great thing for my career as well.
That's amazing. So you basically had a different understanding of what stress is for most people. And so what happened after college? Like, how did you get into where you are today?
I went back to school. I tried not to go actually back to school. My dad was like, "Hey, get your ass back here. Like, do not try to go and sign a contractor, contract and go back to Iraq or any of that type of stuff." And so I started two businesses. I started one when I was in school. I didn't know what I was doing. Made a million mistakes. We basically kind of barely got that across the finish line and ultimately sold it. Second one was a little bit more successful, and we're able to kind of really put ourselves in a position where I was started. Okay, like I'm picking this up, right? I'm understanding how do I recruit people? How do I build products? How do I do market research? How do I actually convince people to give me money for as a customer, things like that. Yeah. But it was still clear to me that I didn't know how to scale, right? And so it was like, okay, now like I'm not an expert, but at least I can go kind of 0 to 1 and I can kind of get these things off the ground. But how do you scale? How do you build a big business? And so I had this choice to make. I could either go and get an MBA and kind of like pay to get an education, or I could go and have someone pay me. And so I ended up joining Facebook in 2014. I was there for 2 years, and it was like a crash course. It was, again, probably one of the better decisions I made in my career because it just put me in the room with people who were world class at what they did, and nobody like sat me down and was like, "Here's the curriculum." Right? Yeah. They were basically like, "Hey man, you got to provide value around here." Right? And so I think I was 25 when I joined at Facebook, and they gave me way more responsibility than they probably should have. And so it was kind of like sink or swim. But because you're around these world-class people, you can kind of ask around, the edges for advice on certain things, or, hey, I'm dealing with the situation. How do you think I should handle it? And what you do is you pick up through osmosis. And so like that was a lesson for me of like, okay, the rest of my career, I always want to be around people who have either done something I want to do, or I want to be around people who have knowledge that I want. And if I can just pick it up through osmosis by being around them, that is like, learning on steroids. And so I've really been conscious over the years about how do I surround myself with those types of people? Because if you can continue to learn, it's compounding, right? Just like you can compound capital, you can compound knowledge, and you just pull away from everyone else because you just have more information.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you say a lot of the skills in terms of in the Army, I'm sure you had to build strong discipline, like what you said, and just be a sponge, essentially. That's what you did once you entered the workforce. And then what was the decision for you in terms of like leaving Facebook to start, your own thing?
Yeah. So when I left Facebook, I mean, basically, I'd gotten advice early on in my career that was like, you can stay somewhere for 10 years, or you can stay somewhere and get 2 years of experience 5 times. Right. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Right. So like, even if you're somewhere 10 years, you may actually only get like 80-90% of the knowledge in the first 2 years. Then you just repeat that over and over again, and you don't actually keep learning.
Yeah.
And so if you look at many of these kind of corporate jobs, usually that is about kind of the tipping point, right? Is if you stay past 2 years, you're probably staying for 5, 7, 10 years.
Yeah.
If you stay for 2 years or less, obviously you're moving on to something else. And so I just got to the point where I was kind of antsy, and like there's a fine balance between being a young person and constantly like grass is greener, and having that antsy feeling just make you want to do something versus sticking with it. But again, in hindsight, I think it was probably the right decision because I'd learned probably 70-80% of what I was going to learn from Facebook. I went and I spent a little bit of time at Snapchat as the head of growth, and then eventually started investing full time. And the investing was really like I didn't have an idea of another company to start. And so I was like, well, maybe I could just like help other people with their companies, and then I'll get an idea over time and I'll start another business. And here we are almost a decade later, and now I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, we have businesses and we kind of do all the operating stuff, but like I really love investing, and so we keep doing that, kind of in parallel to operating the businesses.
Got it. And so you started investing, and you didn't start off with your own fund. You worked at a fund.
We started a micro VC fund. So myself and my buddy Jason Williams, like match made in heaven. We met up one day for a beer. Somebody introduced us. I think it was supposed to be like a 45-minute, 60-minute thing. We were there for like 3 or 4 hours. Next thing you know, like people are calling, like, where are you guys? The whole thing.
Yeah.
And we just hit it off because I think we both were very ambitious. We both were worked really hard. We both had some pretty good common sense when it came to business, but we weren't subscribed to like all the bureaucracy and all kind of the bullshit, right? Mm-hmm. And so, at the time, Jason had this like massive beard and all this stuff, and so we were like, all right, we can work together, right?
Yeah.
And when we got started, really it was about a $3.5 million fund, maybe $3.5 million. And we were going around in the mid-Atlantic region, which is basically like Raleigh, North Carolina, right? I think they call it like DC to Atlanta, but it's like basically everyone that we could find in middle of North Carolina. And nobody invested more than like $50,000 or $100,000 check. Like these are all like super small LP checks. They're like doctor, lawyers, like whatever. Yeah. And you just don't know what you don't know, right? So I was going back and forth between Raleigh and New York City at the time, and there's not a lot of entrepreneurs that are building big companies in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yeah.
So what I would do is, because I had the network from Silicon Valley, everything was remote. So like now this big rise of like all the remote work, I didn't do it because I thought it was cool or because I thought I was ahead of the curve. It was just like, if I want to invest in the best companies, I got to find them, right? Yeah. And so rather than go and try to find the founders, what I did was I knew some of the investors. And so I started calling investors and being like, hey, here's the deals I'm seeing. What are you seeing? And so naturally you call the right people, they have good deal flow, right? You start to get the deal flow yourself.
Yeah.
And so in that first fund, we invested in a number of businesses that absolutely exploded in value. And so that was kind of an initial start to building a track record. The critique of that fund was, it's a $3.5 million fund. You two have no infrastructure. You basically are investors. You're not actually asset managers, which is kind of a nuance. And so that's when we then did a partnership with Morgan Creek Capital and Mark Yusko, and they had real infrastructure, right? They had a big team. They had kind of, we used to joke all the time, they have a compliance team, they have a finance team, right?
Yeah.
Like all these things that go into actually building a business versus just managing kind of a single fund.
Yeah.
And got a crash course of education there as well.
That's amazing. And so when did you pivot from basically, obviously you run your own family office now, but pivot from that to like, putting content online, writing on Twitter, your YouTube?
So when I was at Facebook, I was in this very kind of unique position where I started out, I was the product manager running the growth team for Facebook pages, which way to think about that is like the page product is the top of the funnel for advertisers. So you have to have a page to become an advertiser. Facebook wants advertisers, right? So naturally they want you to have a page because that's one step towards becoming an advertiser. Who gets a page? Small businesses, influencers, celebrities, corporations and brands, right?
Yep.
And so what would happen is I kept getting introduced because of being in that position to all these people who had audiences elsewhere. So one of the first people that I actually got introduced to was the Instagram account Fuck Jerry. And so Ellie, they were building out Fuck Jerry on Instagram, and they were like, well, what should we be doing on Facebook? And so as I got to meet some of these people, it was like, oh, you have to figure out how to use Facebook to build an audience. Yeah. And so just seeing it over and over and over again, having access to the data, understanding how the algorithm works, et cetera, like you just build a base of knowledge. When I left that team, it was to go join kind of a very small team that worked directly with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg to help them do the same exact thing. I didn't go to Facebook and be like, oh, I'm going to figure out how to help people build audiences on Facebook or any of that stuff. It just kind of, you find your way there. And so with Mark and Sheryl, what they wanted to do was basically, they were very, very early. People don't give them enough credit, but they were early to going direct. They realized, hey, we have 1 billion people on Facebook. Mark had like 9 million followers. He's like, they're like, how do I reach my own users, right? Yeah. And he didn't want to do like Tom from MySpace, where he like forced everyone to become his friend. Yeah. Like, I mean, Tom's cool, right? But Mark, I think it was like, hey, I don't want to do that. He also didn't want to really like change the product too much. Like, we now see kind of all these controversies around these platforms that are like boosting somebody's content or down ranking somebody's content. He didn't want to change the product. So he's like, I want to learn how as a user to reach more people, right? Now he's Mark Zuckerberg, so people see his content, they know who he is. Yeah. And so it was a lot of testing, right? It was like, hey, if you post a photo, what's in the photo versus what's not, and how popular is that? So, I don't think I'm sharing anything that would be controversial, but like, if he has his dog in his photo, people like that photo, right? Yes. And so like, okay, like how do we incorporate that into the content? Just like any other brand or content team would do. Yeah. This is back to 2014 though, right? So he's really doing it. So when I got to, investing, what I realized was two things. One, if you want deal flow, people got to know who you are. If you want to win deals, people got to know who you are, right? Like, what do you stand for? Who are you? Like all that brand building type stuff. Yeah. And two was I had no audience. I helped all these other people build an audience, but I'd never done it for myself. And so the easiest platform for me was Twitter, because I could basically just type something on my phone and go. And so in 2017, I literally just worked my ass off, right? And it sounds weird to say like, oh, on Twitter you worked your ass off, but I literally was tweeting like 20, 30 times a day. I was doing everything I possibly could to build that audience. And I went from about 2,000 followers to 100,000. And that's when I was like, all right, there's something here. And I tweeted it multiple times throughout the year. Like I was very clear with people. Audience is the new currency. If you have an audience, you have massive leverage in this kind of new world we're moving into. And so over a 5-year period, I went, Twitter, email, podcast, YouTube, etc. And what I learned was not only is audience the new currency, but also it's the fastest path to learning, because you can put an idea out there, and Twitter specifically, like it don't take a lot for some, troll or critic or whatever to immediately say like, hey, that's wrong. Great, why? Right? Yeah. Explain. And so you get to test ideas very, very quickly, and the feedback loop is kind of tight. And so what you can do is you can iterate closer and closer to the truth. So if you can do it something that isn't really that big of a time investment, you get the leverage from the audience and you get the learning. It's like a grand slam. And so I just started to do that, kind of coinciding with the investing. And, I never thought it would turn into what it is now, but happy that it did.
That's amazing. And so you started off with Twitter, you moved on to email. So you write a daily email, right? And then on top of that, what made you want to start the podcast on YouTube? Was it just to expand your audience, or?
No, there's no master plan. Like the podcast is a great story. There's two guys, Jason Yanowitz and Mike Ippolito. They run a company now called Blockworks. They came to me and they were like, hey, you should have a podcast. And this was after they had like literally harassed me to come speak at one of their events in New York City. And it was one of those things where like, do you ever have someone who like reaches out to you so many times? Like you don't even know how you met them or why or what. But I finally was like, if I come to one of your events, will you guys stop texting me? Yeah. Right.
I know Jason, by the way.
Okay. All right. So like you already know, right? Yeah, and so they were like, yes, of course. Like, that's what we want. Is come to the event. Yeah. So I went, and then they like kept emailing me and all stuff. And they actually sent it to me recently. My first email back to them was, what is this? What do you guys do? Yeah. Right? Like they were putting on the events, but I didn't understand the business, whatever.
Yes.
And so, long story short, is they were like, "You should have a podcast." I was like, "I don't even know what a podcast is." They're like, "Don't worry, we know how to do a podcast." And so, like, great lesson for young people was I didn't know this. They had no clue about a podcast, right? They just knew that if they could work with me somehow, that would be great for them and for me. It'd be a win-win.
Yep.
And so when I was like, "All right, fine, I'll do a podcast," but like, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to deal with equipment. I don't want to deal with setup, takedown, like anything. I'll find a guest. I just want to show up in the room, talk, leave. That's it. They had gone, I think, to Gary Vaynerchuk's guy who was running all the podcasting stuff, and they'd basically DM'd him and been like, "Hey, we're gonna start a podcast. What equipment do we need?"
Figuring it out on the go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So one, figured it out on the go, but also two, like that's a pretty good person to ask, right?
Exactly.
And that person probably wants to help other people figure it out and kind of help young people, etc. So like that story, I think, is really kind of a great lesson of just one, find people that you can kind of work together with, and it's a win-win situation. Two is like you just got to kind of figure it out, right? Yeah. And then if you go back and you watch the first podcast episodes, it is cringeworthy, right? Like we had a microphone, and there was basically like a spit cover or whatever it is. And it's so big that the way that the camera's shooting, you can't see my face. like it's like I might as well just have like a curtain in front of me, right?
Yes.
And so you watch it and you're like, man, how dumb were we, right? Yeah. And it's like funny to laugh at now because you learn over time all this stuff. But it was the willingness to basically do it and just put it out there. Like, who cares? Let's see what happens, right? And so very quickly you start to learn, hey, how do you get better at this? You talk to people and stuff, and then it kind of takes a life of its own. But I actually don't think this would have been successful if I had approached it from like a top down. I am going to build this media business, and we're gonna have a podcast. We're gonna have that's just not how I work. And so I think the organic kind of bottoms up approach was much better and ended up actually building something that was valuable.
Gotcha. So you're very like, I'm just gonna do a bunch of things, test it, see what works, and keep throwing stuff at the wall, and then when something works, double down.
Most people who work very closely with me, it is, if you ask them, they probably would say it's my gift and my curse, right? Over the weekend, somebody was DMing me about Twitter subscriptions. And so like my reaction is on Saturday, right? Was like literally within 20 minutes I had it set up. And then I was just like, hey, I'm starting a subscription thing. I'm gonna do a 30-day test. Let's see what happens, right? Yeah. And so like the violence of action of like idea, execute can be very, very powerful. It also sometimes can get you in situations where you're like, maybe I should have thought through that more, right? And so you got to understand that it's like a positive and a negative. But for me, it is, I have learned to do it as experiments rather than like fully commit. So in maybe 10 years ago, I would have been like, oh, Twitter subscriptions. I am going to launch Twitter subscriptions. Here's exactly what I'm going to do every single week. Here's exactly, what the value is to you, like very rigid kind of approach. And guess what would end up happening is it probably wouldn't end up being sustainable because I would sign up to do too much or whatever. Yeah. Instead, I said, I'm turning on subscriptions. I'm going to do it for 30 days. I'm not promising anything. I'm just going to test and see kind of what works. A couple people subscribe. I start talking to them. Hey, what would be valuable? How does this work? What are you missing in content that you would rather have? Like all this stuff. And like already in 4 or 5 days, we've iterated it away to like, oh, people are like, oh, this is not only valuable, but it's so valuable, I'm going to go tell my friends. Yeah. Something here, right? Now, how big can it get? Is it worth doing past the 30 days? We'll see. But I think that's like a great example of, there's the top-down approach. I call that like the boardroom approach is next year we're going to go do international expansion, right? Yeah. I'm very much take what I call like the street approach, which is no, it's like we got to go get this product out into people's hands. And so I'm a big fan of kind of 90s and 2000s hip hop. And if you go back and you look at, whether it's the Jay-Z's of the world, the 50 Cents, whatever, like they literally just flooded the streets with mixtapes. Like that was the beginning, right? And so what is the mixtape strategy in the digital world today? You have to flood the streets with content or product to be able to build hype and grab attention. Then you take that attention and you capture the value. Like that is what people have been doing for decades, if not centuries. Yeah. It's just that in the digital world, you can't use all of the old analog playbooks, but you can take the essence of what they did and apply it to the digital world. And so no different than like burning your CD, putting it in a plastic wrapper and then going out into the streets and handing it out to try to build hype. Well, what's the version on the internet? It's probably iterating quickly to try to find things that work and then try to scale those, right? Yeah.
So how big is your team right now?
Yeah. The team is kind of split across a bunch of different things. So we have like the operating businesses. I would say there's more than 50 employees across all the different businesses. On the investing side, it's just me and my brothers, which for better or worse, has been highly effective in terms of small team and able to kind of deploy capital as we see fit.
Two brothers or how
I
many?
have 4 brothers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So not all of them are involved day to day, but there's me and one brother specifically that like every single day are doing stuff.
Yeah.
The other ones, if you were to ask them, they'd tell you they invest only in the good deals.
Yes.
So we do the work and they invest in the good deals.
Yeah.
But when you think about on the content specifically, we basically have 3 people, right? We have 2 people who do audio and video, and then we have 1 person who helps with like partnerships, marketing, sponsorship events, things like that.
Yeah.
So those 3 people plus me is like not a very big team, right? Now they are supplemented with, we have a director of finance. We have somebody on the team who handles all the operational stuff. Like we have all these other kind of roles that really are kind of my family office, and they go across all of our companies. But on content specifically, it's 2, audio, video, and then that kind of partnerships person. In today's day and age, you could probably do this without anybody. For me, though, just given how much, I've got other things going on, I need people who are fully dedicated and focused on it. And so having the team makes sense.
Got it. So you have your content team, operating businesses, and then investing side.
Yeah. When I was younger, I would do everything myself.
Yeah.
Like, again, blessing and a curse. I got a lot of shit done, but how long can you do that?
Exactly.
When
It
you burn
doesn't
out,
scale.
right? Yes. And so I think over time I've gotten much better about how do I go find people who are great at what they do and delegate, right? Which is like a classic problem for a lot of entrepreneurs. But also how do I go find people that I'm able to work with where they actually may be better at it than I am, right? So for example, with video editing, a lot of people would be surprised that I don't actually see most of the videos, the final edit before they go out. Now, if you were to talk to, a Mr. Beast or somebody like that, like they obsess over every single little detail, right? But that is the core of their business. For me, the content is something we do, but it's not, we're not hanging our hat on it.
Yeah.
If the content was the biggest opportunity, then I would just shut everything else down, right? It's one thing that we do, and so I trust the people who edit the videos, and they do that. Every once in a while, they do something, I'm like, hey, let's not do that anymore, whatever. But I think that understanding where to invest your time and energy is really important, but also understanding like what's the ROI on that investment. And so if I were to spend 3 hours reviewing every single, kind of cut of every single video, what are we going to do? Get an extra 10,000 views?
Yep.
Like, what does that mean in terms of, impact on the businesses, impact on the investments, in terms of revenue? Like, it's immaterial compared to everything else.
Yeah.
And so when I look at it that way, it's like, all right, the team, put them in a position to be successful, give them, kind of the green light, and then just go and focus on the areas where maybe you don't have somebody that you can kind of trust to do that stuff and go do that stuff.
Yeah. Do you have an operator running your operating business on a day-to-day basis, or is that you right now?
Each business is different. So if you were to think through some of these, I also think that not only is the structure different. So there's some businesses, like we have a recruiting business that we own. That recruiting business we purchased. There's 2 guys, they run it. They're the original kind of founder and his first hire, who's now kind of come into his right-hand man role. They're fantastic. Like we do a call once a week for 30 minutes. They ask when they need help, right? I give them ideas if I've got ideas, but for the most part, like they run that business, they do a great job doing it. I don't really need to be involved. And like, I always joke with them. I say, hey, if I was running the recruiting business is going to zero, right? Like I'm not the guy to be able to go and do that. And so understanding that they're better at it than I am, I can just kind of give them. We have a business in the research space, a business called Reflexivity Research, where we basically create research and then we sell it to hedge funds, family offices, et cetera. That business is fairly new. It's less than a year old. I've been very, very involved in helping get it off the ground. I'm not doing the research, right? The research analysts know how to do the research. Yeah. Well, actually what we need is the go-to-market. How do we actually get this into people's hands? I have the connections. People know who I am. I understand how to structure the deals. Like I'll be very involved.
Yeah.
If I'm still that involved a year from now, something went wrong.
Yep.
Right. And so like where we are in the sequence of a business is really important. And then on the media side, like for better or worse, this podcast doesn't get recorded if you don't do it.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Same for me is if I don't do the content, it doesn't get recorded. And so it's actually a bad business from like a day-to-day, kind of operational standpoint. Cause like being a doctor or a lawyer, you got to touch the patient, you got to touch the customer. If you don't do it, you don't. So if you go and Robert Kiyosaki has this like something he calls a cash flow quadrant, I think, which is like a really old book. But he basically talks about like you can be an employee, you can basically be like a small business owner. You can be an employee, you can be self-employed, you can be a business owner, you can be an investor. And he's like, most people operate on the left side of that quadrant, but they think, oh, I went from employee to business owner, right? Like I'm killing it. He's like, no, you don't own a business. You are self-employed. You just got yourself a job, right? You have to touch every client. You have to do the work yourself. Really what you want to do is you want to move into either the business owner role where you're not running the business day to day, or into the investor role, right?
Yep.
And so that's where kind of true wealth ends up getting built. It's just hard for people to do that because the easy things to do are the self-employed opportunities where they're like, oh, I'll just do it.
Yep.
It's great to get off the ground with 0 to 1. How do you scale? You got to get into those other areas.
Yep. Got it. So what other operating businesses do you have aside from the recruiting firm and then the research firm?
Yeah, so we have all kinds of different businesses. I think minority positions, like over 200 businesses, right? Now, those businesses are everything from what I would consider like kind of small business stuff to venture capital investments where we own like 1% of the business, right? So it's like
that's from your fund that you've invested in. Okay.
I had the original fund, then did the bigger funds.
Yeah.
Now out of the family office, we made a bunch of investments, right?
Yeah.
And so those are, yes, we own part of the business, but like we're not involved day to day in operating or anything like that. In terms of the core operating businesses, I would say that there's really kind of 3 different things that we have. We've got the media business. We've got a holding company of various products and services in the crypto industry. There's a job marketplace. There's training programs for corporations. There's research. There's the recruiting firm, et cetera. So like all the things that are not necessarily tech products, but are needed for an industry to thrive, we've been able to put them together in a really interesting way where we can go to a company and say, hey, we can help you find people. We can train those people. We can form those people, right? We can kind of do all these things that you're going to need, but you want to outsource rather than build internally. So that holding company kind of houses all of that. And then we've got another one that we've recently just started where we're trying to go and actually acquire all sorts of different businesses outside of the tech industry. We'll see how it goes, but I'm pretty excited about it because when you go and you look at a lot of these businesses, like take the industrial sector as an example, you are absolutely selling painkillers, not vitamins. People need these products, right? And they're going to buy the products whether you exist or you don't. And so really it comes down to how do you execute? It's all about execution risk. And why I like that is because most of the competitors, there's one business that we've been looking at that involves a call center. And now that call center is in the brokerage business. So when I see that business, I'm like, man, how antiquated is it that people are calling into a call center, people are looking things up on their computer, and then they're calling the people back with pricing. Why don't you automate it, right? And so that's a perfect example where like that execution has already built a pretty big business. But if you can upgrade with technology, can you execute even better? And then you can actually beat the competitors because you offer lower pricing, et cetera. So can you go into these sectors where most of the people I talk to about this in the tech industry, they're like, dude, what are you doing? Right? Like, why would you ever want to go play in a space where there's physical items, right? Or dealing with, people who don't understand technology or whatever. It's like, yes, that is a challenge, but part of it is like, there's very little competition. If you kind of subscribe to the teal view of the world of like, competitions for losers, like maybe actually going to compete in these markets where nobody else is really looking or no one's excited is actually the opportunity that is kind of largest. And so we're kind of putting that together now and trying to figure out how to do it in a sustainable, scalable way. But that's the one I'm probably the most excited about because if we get it right, we can just run wild throughout, that whole industry.
Got it. And so for your crypto holding firm, I know you said that there's a lot of different pieces in that. You have your crypto, training program as well, the job placement program. Who runs and manages that day to day, and like how do you guys get clients on that end?
So I run the kind of holding company, if you will, and that entails a couple of different products. And we have people who are like the person responsible for something, right? We've got somebody who's the director of education on the training program, does a fantastic job. He's involved day to day, talking to potential customers. He's actually helping to deliver the content, et cetera. Then some of the other businesses have, like a GM or CEO or whatever. When you look at that product specifically or that kind of holding company, what's interesting about it is it's all actually really focused on people. So when you think about people in the non-crypto world, there's tons of products out there, right?
Yep.
But actually, if you look at what we did is we basically just took the market and said, well, what if we just all specialize this stuff for this crypto industry? And so we've helped over 2,000 people get a job, right? And so when I think about like what gets me up in the morning, it's like, do you know how impactful it is to get one person a job?
Yep.
Right? They go from maybe they had a job, but they don't like it. Or maybe they had a job and they weren't getting paid enough, right? Or for whatever reason, to get them a new job that they like and that they feel like they're getting paid, kind of the value that they deserve is incredibly impactful for one person's life, We've done that 2,000 times in about 2.5 years.
Wow.
Right. And so that's like 2 to 3 people a day that we're helping get these jobs. And so when you look at that, you start looking at the average salary and also like it's meaningful.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you kind of take that approach, it's like, man, what else would be more fun to work on than having this impact on people's lives? Now, I tend to always look at this stuff from the perspective of like, I actually don't care that much about what are the financial results on a day-to-day basis. Like if we help people get these jobs, keep them informed, keep them trained, do all these things, the money will come, right? And so it's really, really focusing on just like, how do we help the companies and the people find each other and kind of make that match? And if we do that correctly, everything takes care of itself.
So in terms of like your week to week, how do you find time to, balance health, your relationship, work, business? I feel like that's quite a lot of just stuff you're involved in.
I have no hobbies. Like this is what I fucking love doing, right?
Business,
and so if you think about a single day, one of the things I take great pride in is if you were to talk to most people who have ever worked with me, they'll be like, dude, I thought I worked hard. Like that motherfucker is unstoppable, right? And it's just because over time I've built up this capacity for an immense amount of work in a single day. And so to give you a kind of a glimpse at it, I pretty much will go from 8 to 4, back to back, no breaks. Right. And it's 30-minute meetings, just back, whatever. Now, I don't necessarily want to do that, but we have so much stuff going on and I'm needed in certain things until I can get them kind of delegated to other people that I'll do that multiple days a week. Right. Then I'll go home. I'll take like a little break, or maybe an hour or so. And then I'm just right back at it until about 8 o'clock at night. And so when you look at that, like, man, that's a lot. But it's like, yeah, but what else would I do? Like, this is so much fun, right? And it's like a lot of people are sitting in their corporate job and they're like, man, I can't wait to get out of here and go to the golf course. I'm like, dude, I don't give a fuck about that, right? Like, I can't wait to get on this next call, right? Yes. I did a call yesterday with somebody for an hour. It's a friend of mine. And I literally told him when I got on the call, I was like, dude, I woke up this morning and I was like, I got to fucking talk to him today, right? And it's just like that to me was going to the golf course. That was going to whatever. And so if you just know that about yourself, like double down on it. And then the other thing that I do every single day is I make sure that I read. And so at 8 o'clock, I pretty much shut whatever I'm doing down. The team will laugh because every once in a while I'll sneak in a Slack message here or there, right? Yeah. But I just fundamentally believe that like I am happiest when I get to read every day. And so if I work out in the morning, do the work, and then I read at night, it's like the perfect day. Yeah. So I just do that over and over and over again. And what you do is like it's like building a muscle, right? I always joke that like everyone's like, oh, I want to work hard. Like, cool, practice. Yeah. Right? Like, get started, actually do it. And so when you do that, it does two things. One, you do build the muscle memory and you're able to just have a higher capacity for work than most people. But two is like, there's a lot of people that I work with that I think whether they work at our businesses or they work, in the business we've invested in or whatever, they're just like, damn, like I can't complain. Right? How do you complain when the person who is leading an organization is willing to do so much work or willing to do things that they're asking you to do? And so it goes back to like the military, right? Is if you're a NCO or an officer, you eat last, right? Everyone else is kind of taken care of first. Mm-hmm. You're willing to always do the hard work, right? You're willing to always do the things that you're asking these other people to do. And you probably have done it. And so like one of the things in the military that, kind of gets dramatized by the movies and stuff is like, go clean the bathrooms in these war zones where there's everything that needs to be burnt. People are like, why would I ever do that? It's like, well, guess what? Like when other people were younger, that's what they did, right? So they've been there. They've done that stuff. Like they understand how it works. And so I think it's just like we have a couple of crises in America. One is a financial education crisis. One's a hard work crisis. And one's a leadership crisis, right? And you can actually solve two of the three of those by simply just working hard and actually leading by example. And so what ends up being interesting about that is there's lots and lots of people who love to complain. Like we have absolutely become a nation of complainers, right? Sure. People just get on the internet and they're just bitching about anything that possibly goes wrong in their life. I tend to think that actually we need to shift back to being a nation of competitors. And if you think about, think of like the people that came before us, right? I was reading a book recently about the Macmillan family, which is the Macmillan and Cargills created Cargill Inc. Cargill is, one of the largest privately held companies in America today. They came from Ireland in like the early 1800s, the Macmillan family. And they literally showed up in Canada. And somebody was like, you have 200 acres. Here is a map. Go out into the wilderness and go build your house. Like, dude, that's fucking hard. Yeah. By the way, don't get into any conflict and die. Don't get eaten by wild animals, right? Like all this shit. Like, dude, we wake up and we fucking have a supercomputer in our hands within 10 seconds, and we could press buttons and like breakfast could show up, right? Like, I mean, it's like the most cake life of all time. And so if you think about that, like the positive view is we live in the most prosperous, safest time in human history. The downside of that is, damn, is it easy to be lazy, right?
So easy.
And so if we just bring back this idea of like, if you keep in context what the people before us had to do, and you realize how fortunate we are, like it is your responsibility to work hard. It is your responsibility to do these things. And if you do that, not only will you be a good kind of, I think, example for the people you work with or people who look up to you, but also you'll pass those traits on to your kids, to your grandkids, et cetera. And we can kind of keep staying in the right path in life rather than, once you become a nation of complainers get fed. Like that's the other thing. And if you go back in history and you study it, the kind of early warning sign of socialism is complaining. Because people complain. And then what ends up happening is the people in charge are like, dude, we're tired of hearing these people complain. Just give them shit. Right? And when you give them shit, it turns into socialism. You take away the incentive, you can completely screw up entire economies and nations by doing that. And so it's like, hey, we're at a fork in the road. Stop complaining, start competing, and let's get on with it.
Yeah. And I feel like it's tough to shift that, right? Because social media, like what you said, has made it so easy to complain that now you would have to rewire the whole,
You culturally, it has to become unpopular to complain, right? And I have this saying I say in private, probably not politically correct, but whatever. But it's like if you think about cancel culture was a zero interest rate phenomenon. I don't see a lot of people getting canceled right now, right? All of a sudden, the economy gets a little rocky. People are like, oh shit, I didn't make sure I got a job. I got to take care of my family. What's on my balance sheet, right? Like people get it's back to serious time.
Yes.
And so when you have easy money flowing around, people are bored. Like it's literally a product of boredom, right? People are on the internet. They're arguing with each other. They're acting like idiots all across the economy. They're literally just throwing money out the window, right? Because it's easy money. And so when you return back to tighter financial conditions, all that nonsense goes away. And so I do think that the pendulum's kind of swinging back. I don't know if we'll fully swing from complaining to competing, but if we can even get to equilibrium and reduce some of the complaining, great, right? And so then we can kind of get back into it. And nothing will refocus someone more than a threat to their economic status.
Yep.
So if you own a business and easy money's happening, what do? You get distracted. You start doing all kinds of crazy stuff, right? The second you think a recession's coming, people are like, oh shit, take that golf session off my calendar. I got to make sure I got customers, right? And so I think that's kind of, as a society, we're getting back into that a little bit. And you see politicians kind of changing their language a little bit. You see the large banks and asset managers, but you also see individuals. All of a sudden, now it's a lot about, hey, let's focus. Let's get more serious again because the tighter financial conditions, kind of force them to do that.
Yeah. People just get too comfortable when money's easy, right? So
yeah, and this is not a new thing, right? I mean, this has been a lesson throughout history that we've seen over and over and over again. But it's also a thing where you confuse being smart for being fortunate with good timing. And it's like, in 2021, if you got rich, and I put that in air quotes because whatever that means for you. Was it because you did anything, or was it literally just because you happened to just live through 2021, right? And so if it is the latter, then you just got to very quickly become comfortable with the fact that oh, maybe I'm not actually some genius and I should just stick to the fundamental principles, right? There's a lot of people running around. They thought they had all kinds of, really unique investing strategies only to lose a bunch of money in 2022.
Yep.
And so it's you can press out on the risk curve. You can, become distracted. You can do all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's not about how much money can you make in a short period of time. It's how much money can you make and keep over decades, right? And I think that there's a whole generation of people who are just relearning that lesson.
So what are your thoughts right now on the economy in terms of 2023 and what's going to happen in 2024?
I think long term, the writing's on the wall, right? Regardless of what anyone does in the short term, we have too much debt. We're going to continue to debase the currency. It will financially ruin the bottom 50% of the population. Taxes will continue to increase to try to feed the beast of the national kind of government. And I think that America, unfortunately, has continued over this 250, 275 year run, built this amazing thing. But we now have become a nation of complainers, right?
Yep.
TikTok is the best example in my opinion, right? I subscribe to the view that TikTok is a massive threat and is being used in a way that has the potential to program kids and do all this kind of stuff, right? How we got there, though, is very heavily debated, and I think there's a part of that conversation that's missing. TikTok was successful because they built a better product. Nobody held a gun to the 14-year-old kid's head and said, you have to use TikTok.
Correct.
No, they downloaded an app because their friend told them, and they were like, this is fucking awesome. Right?
Awesome.
Look at these dumb videos. I'm addicted, and I'm going to keep opening this app, right? Now, why did TikTok do that and Facebook or Google or Twitter or whoever not do it? We got outcompeted in the market. And so, from my view of the world, the way to correct that problem in the future is we have to win from an innovation standpoint. Yep. We cannot let other countries or other companies from other countries outcompete us. We need to be a nation of competitors. And so if you take that view, you then can kind of go all throughout society and realize competition is a huge, huge part of this. And so another example that's kind of more tangible for most people is the Brightline here in South Florida. So for those that don't know, Brightline, it's not exactly a high-speed rail, but it's probably the closest thing we have to high-speed rail in the United States. It was bought by a bunch of investors in like 2007, 2008, maybe, I think. And in March of 2023, it was the first month in the history of the Brightline that they basically turned a profit. Right? Wow. Now, if you think of a train, there's not a goddamn train in America that's profitable, right? Without subsidies from the government and, all the things that have to happen. Yeah. At one point during 2020, the MTA thought they were going to go bankrupt in New York City with the subway because they had bonds that they had to pay out and there was no fares because everyone's locked at home. Right? Like these are not great businesses historically, and they've really struggled financially because they're just big projects that are expensive. They use a lot of debt, all this stuff. Now, why is the Brightline profitable? In March of 2022, they had 70,000 rides. In March of 2023, they had 170,000 rides. Now, some of that is just demographic tailwinds, right? In terms of more people are comfortable using a train than they used to be. Some of that is a migration to South Florida. So you get more people just coming here. Some of that actually has to do with the Miami Heat are good, right? So people from these other places, they're coming down, they're coming to, whether it's Marlins games, whether it is Miami Heat games, whatever, right? Some of it is because it's freaking nice. So I rode it the other day for the first time, and I literally texted my wife, and I was like, oh, this is like a subway above ground that's nice and on time.
Wow.
Like it's every New Yorker's dream, right? It's like the train's on time and it's nice. There's not like crazy people screaming at you, right? And like whatever. And you can sit down and like, it's like a nice experience. They have like a little food cart.
They have Wi-Fi, right?
Wi-Fi free. Yeah. Like, I mean, it's like amazing. You walk into the train station, you could eat off the floor, right? I mean, it's like so clean, like all this stuff. And so you're like, okay, this is a better product, right? That ends up actually being put out there. It has all these tailwinds along it and it's working. That is competition. Right. And so when you look at something like that, it's like, man, why can't we bring this to the rest of the United States? Right. We can. And so what is it going to take? It's going to take people to do it. And I think that I forget who tweeted this one time, but they were like, look around you. Somebody had a dream for every single one of those things. Right. The building we're in right now, somebody was like, I think I should build that building. And they went and they did it. Yep. And it's like weird to think about whenever that happened. That could have been 2 years ago or 200 years ago, right? Or 20 years ago. Yeah. And somebody went and they got the plans. They went and they got the approvals. They then went and they literally poured the foundation and they built the actual building and like all this stuff. And you look around you, the whole entire world, that's true. And so like Miami is probably one of the best examples. If you look at pictures of Brickell 10 years ago to now, it's like a different
I saw a
city.
video on TikTok actually, funny enough. And it was
education content.
The transformation is crazy.
There was no high-rise buildings for the most part. Now all of a sudden, 10 years later, it looks like a mini New York City, right? Yes. Now, again, I'm not going to say that Brickell is Manhattan, right? Yeah. But like, it's definitely headed in the direction of more high rises, more dense urban area, more restaurants, walkable, like all these things. And so that's in 10 years. Extrapolate that out over 30, 40, 50 years. If that continues, it probably only compounds faster, right? Because now more people are paying attention, more capital pours in, all this stuff. And so like that area will look completely different in one person's lifetime. Right. Yeah. And so I just always go back to this idea of whether we're talking about TikTok or we're talking about the Brightline. Competition is the ultimate kind of game. And it's this free market. And the more we get back to that and people realize, if I want the world to look a certain way, I can do it. I can go compete and create that world. I think that's really one of the great advantages that we have in America, because in a lot of countries you can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you can do that here and you want something to change, go do it. It's your responsibility to go do that. And it'll make everything around your life and other people's life better.
100%. And I think I even saw something the other day in terms of downtown Miami, where it's like the second largest development in the United States. And the first one was Hudson Yards recently for that. And now it's
Miami
downtown
World
Miami.
Center.
Yeah.
I think
Right
that's
around
like,
there.
was it Art Falcone and Mark Roberts, a couple of those guys?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's going to be huge as
They're
well.
going to be
for
happy
Miami.
I mentioned them.
Yeah. Exactly. So I think Miami for sure is on the come up. And I think as long as the policies here are good and it's, it's the taxes, right? The weather, I think there is a huge migration right now, even still coming to Florida.
When you are a nation of complainers, that is the first step towards socialism, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I continuously go back to over and over and over again is the reason why Miami, I think, is so attractive to so many people, and South Florida in general, is the joke is that Miami is the capital of South and Central America, right, or Latin America. Yeah. And if you think about what do all of those people have in common, for the most part, most of those countries have experimented with some form of socialism, and those people wanted out. And they moved, right? And so what ends up happening is if you've seen the experiment before, you vehemently reject those ideas when you see them again.
Yep.
And so I tell all my friends, I'm like, the last place in the United States of America that socialism will take hold is in Miami, Florida. Why? Because all of these people already saw the experiment and they ain't down for it. They're the people who moved with their feet and went somewhere else because they realized this is not the world I want to live in. And so like that's one key piece to it. I think taxes is a big one. The weather's obviously nice. But also there's this like magnetism that happens with density, right? And so like all of a sudden you start getting a couple people to move and then people are like, well, if they're all moving and I want to be around those people, then maybe I should move. And then you start to kind of compound that over time. I have a friend who actually moved from New York to Miami, and he said, Miami is the Monaco of America. And I was like, why? And he was like, well, it's a lot of wealth, tax situation, it's near water, and there's this element of kind of as people want to move there and continue to move there, it becomes a thing, right? And so like, I think that's actually a great way to look at it is if you look in California, New York, et cetera, some people are moving to Texas or Colorado or some of these places, but Miami has been a big winner in terms of flow of capital and a flow of people. And I don't think that it's going to reverse, but also I'm actually of the belief that it's going to accelerate. So if you look at like Ken Griffin moving Citadel to Miami, like people don't realize that's hundreds, if not thousands of people that are high income earners that are going to move to a single city. He's going to build a high-rise tower, like all this stuff. Where are those people going to live? They're going to go into the community. Where are they going to spend their money? In the community, right? Like that one decision by that one person has this massive tailwind effect. Yep. And so when you think about it from that perspective, you're like, okay, how many more of those do you need to completely revitalize an area that wasn't necessarily destitute, right? It was already pretty good, but you inject some capital, inject some people, game on. And, I think that Miami could easily become the city of the 2020 decade. I saw somebody tweet and they said every single decade has a city. So if you go back and you look at like the 90s and 2000s, it was New York. If you look at kind of like 2005 to like 2020, it was San Francisco. Like, are we going to be, 2021 to 2030 or 2035 Miami? Unclear, but it's got a damn good shot to do that.
Yeah, definitely. So when did you move to Miami?
At the end of 2020.
Gotcha. So
I wrote out the whole thing in New York and then decided to leave.
And you're like, I can't take it anymore.
No, to be completely honest, I think my wife and I both, we heavily identify with New York. Yeah. And our mentality, the way we work, a lot of our friends are still there. I don't think it was like we're running from New York. Yeah. I think it was very much like we love New York. We go back quite often. And if there was the only other place I think we would live other than Miami is in New York, right? Yeah. And so I think Miami was more of just at first, let's go just for a weekend and see what's up. Then we realized a lot of our friends had moved, all this stuff. And so we were like, well, let's just try it for a couple of months. And that turned into now, 2.5 years. And I think that we look at it as basically it is as close to New York as you can get without it being New York, with better weather, better taxes, and kind of density of people. Exactly. And so if you're fortunate enough to live in Miami and then maybe you just go back, 4 to 6 times a year for, a week or two, kind of get best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Like to me, that is, ultimate freedom. Like the ultimate wealth is like that stuff, not some number in a bank account or anything. So it's like, we know that that's something that's important to us. And so like, let's just go build that life.
Yeah. So how's your travel schedule right now? Do you travel a good amount?
I've been traveling drastically less. So in 2019, I took 120 flights. I was running around the world. I was fundraising. I was doing all this kind of crazy stuff. 2020, obviously, took very few flights. In 21, I basically made the decision I want to try to keep the 2020 schedule, but go back to kind of the work velocity and kind of capacity as the world opens up that I had in 2019. It was much more successful than I thought. And so I've pretty much said to myself, look, I will travel for certain things if I need to, but now I'm much more intentional about it. Like when I was single for sure, and then even when Plynn and I were just dating, I didn't really no responsibilities. I could, get a phone call tonight and be on a plane. Literally, I would drive to the airport right now, right, and like go fly somewhere if I needed to. It's different now, right? And so I think that by being more intentional, like we will go. There's a couple of trips that we have to make over the summer for work stuff, but we're gonna go for like a week, right, and try to enjoy it and do all this stuff. And so like, I think it's less about like, are you traveling or not traveling, and now it's more like we travel in a different way. And by being more intentional about it, actually, it's more enjoyable. Like, I don't know how many planes I slept on, red eyes and in airports and canceled flights. And like, it's just a chaotic life, right?
It's chaotic.
Fine when, you don't really have a lot of responsibility and you're kind of really focused on, achieving something in the professional world. But how long can you really do that? Yeah. Some people do it their whole career.
I don't know how some people do it. Like, because I know some people, like what you said, they'll fly out on like Sunday night or super early Monday morning and then come back, by like Friday morning or, late Thursday night. And that's the schedule.
Dude, I'll tell you 2 stories of things I used to do. So I used to drive to the airport in a morning, fly to Chicago, go do like 2 or 3 meetings, and then fly back that night.
Wow.
Right. Then there was another time I flew to Chicago. I don't know why Chicago is both of these, but I flew to Chicago. We did a meeting. We got a rental car. Then we drove to, I think it was like Detroit or somewhere in Michigan, maybe.
Yeah.
I forget. And then we like took a flight back. Right. And it was like, what are we doing? But like, it was important, right?
Yeah,
there was things that we were doing, whatever. Part of it also was like, I always wanted to try to get home.
Yeah.
Like, I know a lot of people who, they'll like plan these business trips and like, oh, I have a meeting on Tuesday at noon. And then I'm going to meet a friend at 5 p.m. And I could, rush to the airport and try to catch the last flight, but just stay overnight and I'll come back the next day. I always try to get back. And so when you try to get back, what you do is you kind of try to be more efficient, try to cram things in, but now you got 2 flights in a single day.
Yeah, it's
brutal. Right. And so, I mean, it's tough, but if you can just be more intentional about what you're going to do, it's a more enjoyable life.
So how'd you meet your wife?
We met through work. She was a reporter at Fortune magazine. She used to write articles about tech industry and venture investing. And eventually, she became the writer behind Term Sheet, which is like Fortune's big daily email about the tech industry. And it was kind of this weird thing where we met, and I don't think that I'd ever like dated or even got on a date or anything with anyone from work. I was very much like, hey, this is different, the kind of different part of my life. And in the first meeting, it was kind of like, all right, we're going to have to, like, is this a professional relationship or like, are we interested in each other personally? And I don't know. It's kind of like this weird thing. I never believed the like, oh, as soon as you meet someone type. I was like, that's bullshit, right? Like whatever. But yeah, it was just like very obvious right out of the gate where it was like, I want to spend more time with that person, but you don't know what they think. Right. Yes. So you're kind of like, all right. And so we were just talking and like, it became obvious, I think pretty quickly, like, all right, we want to spend more time together. Yeah. And I joke with her all the time. Like that was it. Like, it was like, literally I went from absolute maniac, partying all the time, like, had what most people would consider like the life in terms of like being a single guy, running around the world, doing all kinds of crazy shit.
This was when, what year?
This is in 2016, at the end of 2016.
Yeah.
And then like literally overnight, I was like, no, that's my girlfriend. And she was like, wait, hold on.
Wow.
I was like, no, that's my girlfriend.
And this is back when you were, you said you were single, going out, you were working a ton on business as well.
Yeah. It's like fucking, I used to have a saying, anything worth doing is worth overdoing.
Yeah.
Right? Like that pretty much, like that one sentence summarizes my life before I met my wife, right? It was just like, oh, we want to work? Cool, let's work 12 hours, right? Oh, we want to go out? Let's go out till 4:00 in the morning, right? Like, oh, want to drink? How about we drink 10 beers, right? Like just anything worth doing was worth overdoing. And like, to be honest, I like squeezed every ounce of juice out of my life I possibly could. And so I always joke, and she hates when I say this, but I'm like, if I literally die tomorrow, I won. Right? Like I've had an amazing life. I literally have accomplished so many things that I wanted to accomplish, and I had fun, right? Like I'm happy. Yeah. And so I hope that doesn't happen, right? You know, knock on wood, right? Yeah. But like when you get to that point, I look back and I'm like, why did that happen? And it's because when I was 20 years old, right? And I was sitting in the desert in Iraq, and you see a bunch of shit, all of a sudden you're like, you know what? Actually, I know what the end of this story is. And so let me go and do this. Now, when you're really young, that's like reckless stuff, right? You know, motorcycle, you're going fucking 120 miles an hour down the highway, like all the crazy stuff that people kind of know and is well documented of young guys who, you know, feel like they're invincible, right? But now all of a sudden it's like, all right, what am I optimizing for? And when I ask a lot of people that I work with or companies I invest in or whatever, almost always they answer with a professional answer, right? And I always ask them, I say, is that what you are optimizing for in your life or in your work? And a lot of people, they never thought about what am I actually optimizing for in my life? Mm-hmm. And so for me, like it is this really stupid thing, but like my goal is to be happy. And that feels so fluffy and all this stuff. But like all that means is I took, okay, what makes me happy? How do I structure my days to do that as much as possible? Just do that. Like that's fine. And so like there's a lot of people who probably look at my life now and they're like, dude, this is boring as shit. Like what? You have no hobbies. You have no. Yeah. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I get to do my hobby all day long, right? You know, on the ride over here, there's nothing on my calendar. 2 people called me, and I'm sitting there talking to them. I have no interest in their business. I have no benefit, like any of this stuff. It's just fun, right? I'm like, oh, you could do this. What about this? Did you ask this person this? If you structured it this way, what would be the ramifications? Like, blah, blah, whatever. Last night at 8:30 at night, a founder called me, and it's like hair's on fire, right? He's got a problem that he's dealing with. Yeah. And my wife's like, come on. But I'm like, hey, you know, it's like a guy who sneaks out in the backyard and he built like a little putting green, right? I'm like, hey, like, you know, like the addict is going to get
30 seconds. Yeah.
It's only 5 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes. Just 12 minutes later, she's like, let's go. Yeah. And so like a lot of the founders that I've invested in, like they kind of know now, right? They're like, all right, look, I can call him and he'll answer, but like I ain't got an hour. Yes. And so, but it is kind of like that, right? Is some people, you know, they literally can't wait for the basketball game. And they're like, dude, my friends are going to come over. I'm going to drink some beer and watch a basketball game. I played 3 sports in high school. I played football in college. Like, I love sports, right? It's really hard for me to sit down and watch entire seasons of sports now. Like, if you asked me at the age of 18 to name NBA players, I could name a very high percentage of people, at least the starting 5 on like half the teams, right? Like I like knew a ton. Yeah. I wasn't an expert, but I was very interested. Now, I don't think I could name the starting 5 on a single team.
Wow.
And so it's like, is that because I got more mature? Is that because like my life interest changed? Is that just because like I realized, hey, this is fun to like watch one game, but like I really don't care about the season? I don't know. Yeah. But it's like probably one of the biggest differences because I have a brother who has doubled and tripled and quadrupled down on sports, right? And he could actually sit here and he probably could name the starting 5 on every single NBA team. Right. And so it's like kind of this weird thing where maybe through life you kind of get really interested in some things and then at other times you're interested in other things. I'm not sure. But I'm happier today than I've ever been, which is like a very weird thing because it's doing things that previously I didn't like to do. Mm-hmm. Like I used to hate to read. Yeah. Right. Like teachers be like, will you read? I don't think I read a single book in high school. Right. Like a signed book.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got through high school, but I don't think I read a single one they told us to read. And so like I was a power user of Cliff Notes and like I probably spent more time trying to figure out what was in the book than just if I had sat down and read the book, right? But like now I'm like, man, if I went through high school right now, I'd sit in the front of the class, I'd ask all the questions, I'd read, I would be like the model student. Back then, I was the exact opposite. I was a complete class clown. Yeah. And so it's just like, I don't know, maturity, life, interest change, whatever, but like it's interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting to see just the progression and how your things, but like what you said, the biggest thing is just figuring out what you really enjoy doing, what makes you happy, and only doing that.
That's it.
So
That's literally, again, it goes back, what are you optimizing for?
yeah,
And some people are optimizing for a number in their bank account. Some people are optimizing for an accomplishment, right? They want to achieve something, whether it's in their personal or professional life or whatever. I've just chosen, like, I want to be happy. And the way that I define happy with my wife is we want to live an extraordinary life doing the things we want to do when we want to do them.
Yep.
Right. And if you can do that every day, like, you win. And so it's the old joke of people saying, hey, once I get rich, then I'll like become a writer, or, once I get rich, I'll do this, or once I retire, I'll do this. And it's like, cool. Are you really going to work till you're 65 years old and then try to do it?
yeah,
Like, just do the shit now.
yeah,
Right. And once you start to kind of think that way, it's scary to people, because like maybe that job you thought you wanted at work is actually just a further investment in a bad deal. Right? Is this bad money chasing, even worse money? Maybe. And so if you get the promotion, does that just mean you're going to be here for another 2 or 3 years? But you already hate the job. So why are you trying to achieve something that you hate?
yep.
It's hard, right? It's hard to be intellectually honest with yourself.
Yeah,
But
and
if
I
you
think
can do it.
especially when emotions get involved, especially when time gets involved, like people, it's very tough to cut ties for anything.
All of that is true. And then you add in responsibility. Right? Like I always, I talked to a lot of small business owners over the last couple of months. And one of the things I always ask them is I say, hey, what's your responsibility? And most of them will immediately, because we're talking to business sense, they'll start talking about, well, we have rent payment, we have this. Oh, no. What's your responsibilities? Right? Oh, I got a significant other. I got kids. My neighbor's kid has a medical bill and I'm helping them out with that. I got a car payment. I got a mortgage. I got like all this stuff, right? And so you like total it up and you're like, dude, you can't do anything else. Like financially, you are not in a position to make a different decision, because the second you make a different decision, this tsunami of responsibilities, debt, whatever, will consume you.
Yeah,
And so you're trapped. And so the only way to get in a position to kind of make a move on a chessboard, you got to deal with the responsibility stuff. Now, you can't get rid of your kids. Right? Please don't get rid of your significant other, right? So there's like some non-negotiables, but there's a lot of things that actually you can address, right? And some of it is like financial stuff. Some of it's social stuff, right? You'd be shocked at how many people are like, oh, well, every Thursday night I go and I do this. Why? Well, I've been doing it for 10 years.
yeah,
Do you enjoy doing it? No, I hate it. Stop going.
yeah,
Well, they're gonna judge me or this or my this in the community, whatever. It's like, do you really care?
yeah,
Do people really pay that much attention? Don't go next Thursday and see if anyone calls you. If they call, okay, then you're gonna have to address it. If they don't call, just never show up again. Maybe 6 months and they're like, hey, where's Andy?
Yeah.
Right? Like, hell, I haven't seen him in a while, right?
Yeah.
Like you just don't know. And so I tend to think a lot about like the responsibilities you sign up for. Are they reversible or irreversible? A kid's irreversible, right? But a lot of responsibilities are reversible. And so like, which ones should you be reversing and which ones do you want to keep doubling, tripling down on? You're investing your time. It's your most valuable asset. Think about it as a capital allocator. You're a time allocator. Where you put your time is ultimately where your focus goes, your energy goes, your happiness goes, etc. So invest it wisely.
yeah. And it's so tricky in today's day and age because of lifestyle creep, right? It's, especially early on in your career, or as you start to get momentum in your career, right? You start making money, you start making better money. You want nicer things. It's just a natural part of life. For most people. And I think
when you were younger, did you have a number in your head of how much money you needed to make?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Was it like a net worth number? Was it like cash in a bank, or was it like monthly income?
It was a net worth number when I was a kid.
What was the number?
At least 100 mil.
Okay. So that's a really big number for a young kid to think about, right?
Yeah.
For me, when I was in college, this is going to sound absurd. I literally was trying to back into how could I make $2,000 a month, because then I could live forever.
Yes.
Right? Like right now, like that sounds absurd now, right?
Yeah.
You're like, dude, what? Now, this is, a decade ago, 15 years ago, whatever, right? But like when you think about that for a second, that was the goal, was like $500 a week, I'm good.
Yeah.
Right? Now you get into the real world and you get like slapped in the face and you're like, okay, hold on, maybe I need to make $5,000 a month, right? But like lifestyle creep happens.
Yep.
I actually think a lot of people don't realize and that when they stop and kind of look back, like, dude, I accomplished every goal I've ever had financially until the goals I have now. Right?
Yep.
That's not because I'm some genius or whatever, but it was like the goals weren't really that big. Right? So like $100 million net worth, I don't think I would have had the confidence or like the courage to have that as a goal. Mine was like $2,000. I got $2,000. Like, how do I get 5,000? Right? Like, and you kind of just move up. And so it goes back to this idea of like, if you could choose any point in history to live, you would choose tomorrow.
Yep.
The next best time to live is today, right? Like the world is only getting better, safer, more prosperous, all this stuff. If you think about your financial life, for most people, if things are going well, the single greatest time to be alive in your financial life is tomorrow. Next best time is today, right? Yep. Now, some people get in bad situations. So it's all about the compounding and like the direction of change. But if you're making good decisions, you do go from, hey, I want to make $500 for the summer, right? Then I want to make it $2,000 a month, $5,000 a month, whatever. And you kind of slowly build up. And as you check off each goal, it's kind of like natural, right? Like, well, what's the next goal? Because you already achieved the thing that came before. And so in some ways, like lifestyle creep can be negative, obviously, but maybe it's like you don't want lifestyle creep, but you want goal creep.
Yeah.
Right? So your goals get bigger, but your responsibilities stay the same. And that delta is really like the true wealth that you're generating.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, especially when I first started out in business, it's obviously I had that big goal in mind, but it's like, okay, how can I make, 10K a month from this business? How can I make 50K a month, then 100K a month, then, X amount. So
when you look at those goals too, what I think is so funny is business people, they always come with a plan. And so many people outside of the business world, they have like the goal, but there's no plan. Right. And so one of my favorite things to do with young people is like, what do you want to do? Right. And I was talking to a kid recently. He's in college trying to figure out a summer internship or whatever. He was like, I want to break into investing. I was like, okay, what's the plan? And he was talking all about how he was trying to like get introductions to people and do all this stuff and everything. And I said, that is a path. You could do that. But what if you flip it? How do you get them to come seek you out? He's like, what do you mean? I was like, if you want to meet people who you deem of high value, the best way to do it is to be of high value yourself, right? Like be interesting.
Yep.
And so he was like, well, what do you mean? And I started talking to him. I was like, well, what happens if you had a niche that you got on Twitter and all of a sudden you became known as the person who had the expertise on X, right? A lot of people would want to talk to you. And so, for a college kid, like maybe your thing is you run surveys at all these colleges and you get all the technology trends and then you package it up and you send it to all the, billionaires and VCs and all these people you want to meet and everything. And then you say, hey, by the way, I'm happy to jump on a call for 20 minutes and explain this to you. Right? And you send it to 400 of them. 5 of them say yes. We just met 5 of, your heroes. Like, like these games of just like, how do you provide value rather than try to extract it?
Yeah.
I think ultimately comes back to this idea of a plan, not just some wishy-washy, like, oh, I hope that I could meet, whatever. And so to me, the story of the guy who stood outside of Tesla or SpaceX to meet Elon?
No.
He was live streaming and posting videos on the internet for 40 days or something. I forget all the details, right?
Yeah.
But that's insane.
Yeah.
Right? He met Elon. right? Like imagine telling your grandkids, I one time hung out with the world's richest man. Like, how'd you do it, Grandpa? I was a psychopath. I slept in my car outside his office and I literally harassed the shit out of him until he met me, right? Respect.
Yeah.
Right? Now, please do not go do this, right? But that's a perfect example of he had a plan that seems insane to everyone. But eventually it's okay, dude, this guy's been out here for 45 days. How do we get him to go away?
Yep.
Right? Just tell him to come in here and I'll talk to him for 5 minutes, right? And then he'll leave. And so there is kind of this weird world of just what are you trying to accomplish? What's the plan? And then go execute.
Yeah. And I almost feel like a lot of people do that. There used to be a big trend on TikTok where it's like someone's day one of slapping myself every single day until X person responds to this TikTok. And that used to be a thing.
That is literally the Chinese Communist Party trying to make America dumb.
Yeah.
Hey kids, how cool would it be if you slapped yourself? Right. But but yes, right.
Yeah.
Is a perfect example of trying to use the leverage of a platform to do something to get somebody's attention. At the end of the day, whether you send a cold email or you slap yourself on Twitter every single day until someone responds to your DM, You're trying to get their attention.
Yeah.
And the question is, what is the best path, right? And how do you get them to respond and do it in the context that you want them to know you as?
Yeah.
But those two things are much more similar than they are different.
Exactly. I want to talk a bit about your podcast. Like, how often do you film episodes? Kind of like how have you systemized that, and how has that grown, since the beginning?
Started out, there was no system. I mean, it literally was I just did whatever I wanted, which was fun, but not sustainable. Then we became highly, highly systematized. We did all kinds of different shows, all this stuff. And now I've kind of found like a sweet middle ground, right? Mm-hmm. Where we did 2 to 3 episodes a week. They're usually just the people I want to talk to. They tend to lean much more towards business, finance, economics, Bitcoin, things like that. And I just sit down and I talk to them. Like, I do almost no prep, right? It's just me trying to learn. Yeah. And some people build podcasts because they want to build a business. I built a podcast because I wanted to learn, and the business just happened to come along with it. But we've done many times. We've made decisions that are financially disastrous for the business, but I don't care, right? Like, my goal is to just meet people, learn from them, and then be able to share that information with other people. And so, again, what are you optimizing for? I'm not optimizing for the money, right? Mm-hmm. I'm optimizing for the learning. And so as we've done that, what we've come to the conclusion of is like, we want to have kind of a very loose structure in terms of how many episodes a week, who are the types of people, that type of stuff. But actually, we don't obsess over, did we grow 3%, day over day? Did we grow 10%, week over week? Like, we just don't do that stuff. And it would be bigger if we did. But again, that's not my focus, right? Yeah. My focus is the learning component of it, and it'll kind of organically grow over time just from high quality content.
Gotcha. And so, are you interviewing people 2 to 3 times a week, or is it just you have some episodes where you talk alone? How do you balance that?
It's all interviews on the podcast. YouTube, every once in a while, I'll do a video where I just kind of talk to the camera. They're way easier to do, right? Frankly, than the 2-hour interview. And usually the interviews, what's fascinating about it is I try to pull out information that isn't just about what they do, right? So same way that we're talking about goals or daily routines or whatever, like anyone who you meet, you can learn something from. But it's not only about the thing that they're an expert in. Because actually, I would argue that you and I are more experts in our daily routine than we are in business or finance or whatever, right? Because it's the thing that we do every single day. Like, we could talk with immense detail. Do you put your left or right shoe on first? Like, you got a system, right? Yeah. Like, we can say whatever we want, but like, you got a system, even if it's one that you don't intentionally create, right? Yeah. When you brush your teeth, like, do you start on the left side or right side of your mouth? Like, we're humans, we're built with this nature. And so how do you take something that, like, I don't give a shit how you brush your teeth, right? Yeah. But then how do you look at, well, how do you read? And so, like, one of the funny things about, as I've read so many books, is I'll meet people and they're fascinated with, quote unquote, the system that I use to read, right? And then I'll ask them, well, how do you read? And some people will say, oh, well, I do audiobooks, right? And I don't take any notes and I just kind of listen when I'm out on a run or driving or whatever. Other people are like, oh no, I read on my Kindle, I highlight, I pull it into, Readwise, I do like all this stuff and everything. And then what you start to learn is not only what the system is, but who the person is based on the system they use, right? If you take tons and tons of notes, that says something about you. If you take no notes, it says something about you, right? And neither one's good or bad, but you start to build kind of this like profile of someone and kind of who they are and what makes them tick. And so I love to do that in the podcast where you can talk about their area of expertise, but then you start to really understand them. And one of the things that gets lost on social media is the context around the conversation, right? So all you see a profile picture and somebody you think is yelling and screaming at you. But then if you knew, well, wait a second here, hold on, this person's having a bad day, or this person, has a certain viewpoint because of A, B, and C experience they have or whatever, you become more understanding. And so I just try really, really hard on the podcast, like, how do I extract that information so that it puts more emphasis on certain parts of what they're saying around their area of expertise? I don't know if everyone gets that out of it, but for me, like, that's super, super valuable.
Yeah. I agree 100%. And I think it's seeing a lot of these core fundamental, like, it's almost like you have your business operating principles and you have your life operating principles, right? And I think if you have a good idea on both, you'll understand how someone got to the results that they got, essentially. So it's very interesting to see. So.
If you go back and you look at many of the most successful people in the world today, it will blow your mind at shit they did in their 20s, 30s. Right. I was just listening to the Acquired podcast. I don't know if you ever listen out, but they do kind of these breakdowns of companies and stuff. And they did one on LVMH, and it's like 3.5 hours. Fantastic work, right? And I'm listening to it, and all of a sudden, I'm literally working out, and they say, and then Bernard Arnault moved to Palm Beach to build like shitty 20-unit multifamily like apartment buildings in like, his early 20s or 20s, 30s, whatever he was. You're like, wait a minute. You're telling me the guy who literally owns, Louis Vuitton and Dior and like all these like super luxury brands was literally building like affordable housing in Palm Beach at one point? And it's like, well, yeah, his family was in the construction business. They got out of like kind of the construction they were doing to get into like vacation rental type stuff. Then he was like, let's go to America, right? And he did it there. Then he ended up going back, like all this stuff. And you're like, dude, that guy was just trying to figure it out, man, right? And like, he figured it out. He's second richest guy in the world. Like he really figured it out.
Yeah.
But like when you start to understand that, you're like, maybe it's okay that I'm trying A or B or C in my life. And you can go through all these people, right? And it's fascinating. And so like, Warren Buffett is a great example, right? Where like Warren Buffett early on with some of like the partnerships and some of the things that he did, if you go back and you look, it's like not exactly what Warren Buffett's known for today, right? But that's because he was trying to figure it out, right? If you go and you read Jimmy Sony, I think is his last name. He wrote a book called, I think, The Founders, which is all about the PayPal mafia. And one of the stats in there is like 4 of the 5 PayPal founders had created bombs in high school.
That's
like,
crazy.
Okay. Well, like, they weren't terrorists, right? Like they were doing science experiments and they were trying to figure things, they were tinkering and like it was like an inquisitive, curious mind type thing, right?
Yeah.
Is at least the way that's presented.
Yeah.
And so when you see that, you're like, okay, I don't think people should go do that, right?
Yeah.
But like maybe it is okay to try a bunch of different things when you're younger. And as you kind of build up the muscle memory and the experience and the connections and all this stuff, then you can start to find success. And so I tweeted this morning, the average age of a successful founder is 42 years old.
Wow.
42. Why? Maybe the first 20 years of their career is just practice. They learn, they try to build a little base of financial security, they get experience, they build connections, they do all this stuff. Only 42. That's the average age of a successful founder. So if you think about that, everything that happened in my 20s and 30s, now, my wife and I, we always talk about like, we're practicing. There's a lot of people who look at the shit that we do and they're like, that's not practice, right? But I'm like, no, there's some bigger opportunity that will come in my 40s or in my 50s, maybe my 60s or 70s. And this is all practice leading up to that. And so when you make a mistake, it's practice, right? Learn from it.
Yep.
When you make a good decision, it's practice. It doesn't count, right? And so by presenting it to yourself as practice, you never believe your own bullshit and you never get too down when you make a mistake. And you realize that this is a lesson that I'm learning, right? That I then will apply in the future. And so it's been like this great kind of framework to constantly be serious, right? If you want to be a professional athlete, you're serious in practice, but also understanding it's practice. And so, hey, when the real game comes, whenever it comes, be ready.
Yeah. And I think especially that's so true in business too. Like every 5 years, could be less, it could be more. You're reinventing yourself, right? It's like you have a new business opportunity. Like this first business you start might be some, cleaning company in your local neighborhood or something that gets to $1 million a year. But, next thing you know, you automate that and it's your next business that takes you to 10 mil or 50 mil, right? And then it's the next business after that. That's the 9-figure opportunity. So
100%. And it's also something where you start to make connections across industries, right? I mentioned earlier these like industrial brokerage businesses. The second I saw them, I was like, oh, that's Uber. What's Uber? It's a brokerage business, right? I'm brokering riders and drivers. The only reason why I knew that was because I had looked at Uber and studied it, right? And started to connect. So like, what is this super high tech, fast flying kind of tech company got to do with an industrial company? Same business model, right? Then there's businesses that you'll look at and you'll say, the makeup of this team matches exactly this other industry. Why? They're actually in the same business, right? And so like one of the things I always love to talk to people is, if you run a restaurant, you're in the restaurant business. People think you're in the food business, but you're in the restaurant business, right? Why is that different? Well, what about all these D2C food companies? They're not in the restaurant business. they're in the e-commerce business, right? And so understanding what game you're playing is really important because that determines capital, structure, team, marketing, like all these different things. But then what you start to realize is that restaurant, what do they really care about? How do we efficiently at low cost make great food? That D2C food company cares about the same thing.
Yep.
Right? So there's similarities, but there's also differences. And so being able to identify, hey, what can you learn from the other, but also what are the things that you shouldn't take away? Right. And being able to do that, I think just, again, it's like being informed, having that, like a lot of people call it like a prepared mind. So when you see an opportunity, you're ready to go and then you can pounce on it.
So for your podcast, I'm sure you have someone helping you reach out and get guests as well. So is it kind of like a mix of
Nobody?
Wow, it's just you.
Yeah. Because of the people I want to talk to.
Yeah.
Right. And
so you're reaching out yourself.
Yeah, just like DM them on Twitter, or email them, whatever. Every once in a while, somebody will introduce me to someone or something like that.
Yeah.
But I would say for the most part, it is just me reaching out to them, saying, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you." And I'm incredibly fortunate in that a lot of people say yes. Right. Every once in a while, somebody says no, or timing doesn't work, or whatever. But yeah, it's just me reaching out, and I think it's more that is in line with kind of how I like to operate is, I don't want people to have to like go and talk to somebody else on our team or whatever. Now for scheduling and that type of stuff, sure. Yeah. But if I want to talk to them,
you'll reach out.
I'll ask you, right? You'll talk to me. And then, our team, their team, whatever, can kind of work together on all the details, but at least they know like, hey, he wants me to come on. This isn't just like a mass email blast to, 20 different people to see who will say yes type thing.
Got it. And so you talk to people in finance and business. What have you learned, I guess? Because I know you've interviewed tons of guests at this point. Like, what are some of your top things you've learned?
The biggest lesson is the best investors don't follow the average financial advice, right? The average financial advice is basically buy index funds, dollar cost average, hold them for a really long time, and kind of like diversify. Name a big investor that's ever done that. like a world-class investor. Mm-hmm. They do the exact opposite, right? Heavily concentrated, heavy big bets. There's very little dollar cost averaging. It's like, I'm going to execute now. There's almost no diversification. Like they're super specialized, like whatever. And so there's this barbell where actually, if you know nothing, the kind of like generic advice is probably pretty good. Yeah. Right. It's like just get invested, get into the market, have the index and you're good to go. If you know a lot, the specialization, the concentration, all that stuff is pretty good. The people that get in trouble, I think, are actually the people in the middle. The people who think that they know a lot but don't, right? Yeah. Or the people who kind of are like, oh, I don't really know that much. I know I don't know that much, but like I'm gonna try to do it myself. Yep. And so it's like this like weird barbell. And so a great example is like diversification is the anti-thesis to what Warren Buffett does. It's all about concentration, right? If you look at George Soros, who now a lot of people like to yell and scream about all the political stuff, but like still one of the best investors in the world, like immense leverage, super heavily concentrated investments, and when the odds were in his favor, would bet real big. Again, you're kind of playing, high risk, high reward game there, right? And so another one is high risk, high reward. If you look at Monish Pabrai, who's kind of like he'll just come out and say like, hey, I just copied Warren Buffett, right? His whole thing is like, no, I'm a value investor. I actually want low risk, high reward. People are like, how do you get that? It's like the definition of value investing, right? Yep. Is things that like basically for sure you're going to make money, and there's a potential it goes up a lot. And so like all this, kind of generic financial advice ends up actually not being what the best people in the world follow. Now, what's interesting is then if you go to the other side, well, what's the positive argument for the generic financial advice? It works, right? If you just dollar cost average into the S&P 500 for 40 years, you're going to have more money, right? I don't know how much or, how often you dollar cost average. Like there's a lot of details in there, but like you will have more money at the end than you do today just holding cash. Yeah. And so it then goes back to like, well, what do you want to do? If you want to be an investor, you got to quote unquote turn pro, even if you have another job. When you turn pro is the idea that Stephen Pressfield has. Stephen Pressfield talks about turning pro as a writer. If you want to write books, you want to do this stuff, you got to turn pro. What does a professional athlete do? They show up every day, whether they're sick, injured, tired, whatever, and they do the work. And they do it all day long. They're pro, right? They are a professional athlete of whatever. Okay, if he says that for writing, what about investing? How many people turn pro as an investor, right? Now, a lot of people think, like, oh, I got to quit my job. And like, no. You have to approach it as a professional. do the work, put in the time, study, talk to people, like do all the stuff.
Yeah.
Once you do that, then you have a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance to be a good investor. But, we all know, I mean, I have a young brother, my youngest brother, who in 2021, he told me one time, I was like, hey man, what are all your friends doing? He was like 24, 25 years old at the time. What are all your friends doing investing wise? He's like, man, you don't want to know. And I was like, why? And he's like, I mean, they just invest in all kinds of crazy stuff right now. And I was like what? He goes, they won't invest in anything unless they think it can go up 10x. And I remember being like, oh shit. Right? Because it's just like that is such an insane thought process as a response to the economic environment. Now, if you're saying, no, I'm going to make heavy bets, like it's more of like a calculated investment strategy, okay, fine.
Yeah.
But this was just like money is free and, it's flowing everywhere. And so like I basically only want things that are super asymmetrical. And so I think that's like a perfect example where you had people who weren't that educated, but wanted to be professional investors. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm talking about actually turning pro. So that's one big lesson. A second big lesson is people are all trying to figure it out. I have some of the world's most successful people come onto the podcast, and I talk to them after the podcast about different things, and they sound like they are fucking confused. Right?
Interesting.
Because they're just like, yeah, like everyone knows me for this thing, and I got this thing figured out in the eyes of the public. But like, dude, let me pull back this curtain. Look at this fire that's going on over here, right? And everything's on fire, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I just had an employee quit, and I had this happen. I had this, and you're like, oh shit, like my problems ain't that bad, right?
Correct.
So I think that's another one. One of the things that I think is really interesting is some of the best investment ideas don't come from traditional sources. So like you can read research, you can do all this stuff, whatever. There's story after story after story of, how Thiel invested in Facebook, how some of the Lightspeed guys invested in Snapchat, how somebody invested in Google because the Google founders were working out of their garage, like all this like weird shit, right? It's like nobody was like sitting there reading a Wall Street research report being like, oh, the company Google has a 7% chance of disrupting the 20 search engines that come before it. Yeah. No, it's like somebody went to a party, right? Like a barbecue at someone's house. And they were like, oh, that guy Larry over there starting a company. What are you starting? I'm a Stanford genius. Yeah. Here's $50K. All right, let's see what happens, kid. Exactly. Bam, Google.
Yeah. It's not like hundreds of pages of research where it's like super like linear, right? It's not.
So like one is like people are in a financial position where a 25 or 50K check didn't warrant the research, right? So like they're fortunate to be in that position. But also it goes back to like maybe if they had done a bunch of research, they would have talked themselves out of it. Right? So like you get into kind of that kind of weird, analysis. But also the Google founders didn't even think they were going to build what they were going to build. That's right?
True as well.
I think they wanted to sell it for like $1 million or something, and $10 million, whatever it was, right? Yeah. Like imagine if they had sold for $1 million. It's like comical. Yeah. And so now here's where you put reading, learning, all this stuff together. The story of Google trying to sell for $1 million and no one wants the business. And so they are forced to go build it and they end up building Google is the exact same story as Jay-Z. Jay-Z tried to get a record contract. No one would give it to him. So what did he do? He said, shit, I got to flood the streets with my mixtape. I got to build my own record label. Right? I got to bet on myself. Next thing you know, bam, Jay-Z happens. Those two stories are the exact same thing where nobody wanted them. And they were forced, not by choice, they were forced to go do it themselves. And it ended up working out. For every one of those good stories, there's 1,000 bad ones. Yep. But those two stories are the exact same story.
Yeah. So how do you balance the research, linear, logical side with this, non-routine, like going to just some networking party, saying yes, doing these things where you can basically make that connection, right? Like how do you balance the chaos and the routine to become a better investor?
Do you decide with your gut or with your brain? You got to decide who you are. I'm gut, right? And there's a lot of people who say don't decide with your gut. I look at my gut, right, as it is the culmination of all the information I have in my head. Can't explain it. Sometimes I'm like, yep, I should do it. Sometimes I shouldn't. I'm wrong. Yeah. All the time. But given the type of investing that we do, it's all about power laws. You got to be right one time, right? And so actually going with your gut where you're like, this could be big. It's all about how big could it get, not how much could we lose in venture investing. And so going with my gut 9 times out of 10 is a much better thing than if I sit down and start calculating shit, right? I have this like standing rule. I don't look at financial models in terms of early stage startups. People are like, that's insane. Why would you do that? No, it's literally fiction. They're fucking making it up.
Yeah.
They're guessing, right? Like, it's like, okay, you guys made one, let me make one, right? Like, I don't think you're gonna do 10 million. I think you're gonna do 2 million. Why? I don't know. I fucking made it up, right? like it's just complete fiction. And so, yeah, maybe I'll do like a little like Googling, you know, like, oh, how big's the market, right? Or like very loose type stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm investing in this person. And so I've invested in, I don't know how many, 10, 12, 13 different unicorns at this point where I was an early investor in them. And if I go back and I look at most of them are still doing something that is tangentially related to what they originally pitched, but very few of them are doing exactly what they originally pitched. And so if you go and you study like a Clayton Christensen and kind of the disruption theory and all this kind of stuff, or innovator's dilemma, what you find is that there are like defined strategies, and then there's something he calls like an emergent strategy. And so defined strategy means like, I am going to build this table, and here's the exact specifications, here's the material I'm going to use and all this stuff, right? And I go and I build it. Like I follow the defined strategy and I did exactly what I said I was going to do. That's great when you're building one single unit of a product, right? But if you want to build a company, what you do is like, I'm going to build 50 tables, and then I'm going to sell them to this person. I'm going to for this price, whatever. And then you go talk to the customer, and they're like, dude, I'm not buying it for that. Shit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So like either it's over, or, well, how much would you pay? What type of materials are interesting to you? What are you going to use it for? Start learning. Oh, well, rather than sell them the 50 tables for that price I thought, what if I actually built it with a different material? I could lower the price, and then rather than them use it inside of their really fancy, commercial real estate building, actually what they're going to do is they're going to use it out back in the recreation area, and the cheaper material will make it, affordable, blah, blah, whatever. Great. You'll buy that? Awesome. Okay. I'm going to go follow that strategy now. Right? That's the emergent strategy. It's because the defined strategy ended up not working. And so when you go and you look through all these companies, most of them did not actually end up building what they thought they were going to build. Right?
Interesting. Amazon,
Jeff Bezos never thought about AWS.
Yeah.
Right? He was going to sell books on the internet, and maybe he could sell some things past that. AWS, pretty good business. Yeah. Right? Facebook was called Hot or Not. Right? Yeah. And they were basically, or Face Smash, whatever the hell it was called, right? Yeah. Like they were basically like, are you hot or are you not? Yeah. And turned into Facebook, right? And so like you start to like see some of the stuff and you're like, man, you want to have a defined strategy, but you got to be open to the kind of emergent strategy and be willing to jump on that. And then one other thing I would say that I think is pretty interesting is the more successful and older someone is, the more obsessive they are with surrounding themselves with young, intelligent, hardworking people. So I've been fortunate to go to a bunch of these folks' offices. And like, so this isn't like, social, right? This is work, right? They are in an office, and literally the richer they are, the more young people there are. And it's because they're getting older and they know I have to disrupt myself, but I'm old. Right?
Interesting.
And so, we have somebody who works for us who he texts me sometimes, and it's like I'm deciphering like the Magna Carta, right? He'll be like something FR, words. I'm like, what the fuck is F? Oh, for real? Right? Like I gotta think, right? Yeah. And then the other day I asked him how something he did like an event thing, and I was like, how'd it go? And he hit me with P good. What the fuck is P? Pretty good, right? Like I literally felt like I was like a detective, like uncovering what he was saying. Yeah. And so I thought for a second to be like, hey, dude, can you write the words out? Yeah. And I was like, no, actually, I want him to text like this because guess what? That's how he's texting his friends, right? And so I didn't know what P good meant or FR, but as I was realizing, I was like, one, shit, I'm getting old, right? But two is, man, how do I learn more things from him? He probably thinks he's learning a lot from me, but I'm learning just as much from him about how, a 21-year-old and kind of his friend group operate. That's going to tell me a lot about how the world's going to play out over the next, 20 years.
And I think that what you're saying, it goes back, right? Because the Lightspeed venture partner who invested in Snapchat, it was his daughter who basically was like, correct, look at this app that all my friends are using. Yes. Right. So,
I mean, that's how a lot of these things end up getting discovered, right? Yeah. If you have a product or a service that is targeted to a kid, right? How's an adult supposed to find it?
They're not.
Maybe they buy it for their kid or something, right? Exactly. But like, no. And so, my wife, we joke all the time, she's a better investor than me. She has told me about 4 different companies that ended up going on to be billion-dollar businesses that she told me very early on. And I was like, I don't know, whatever, right? Like, I don't know anything about that type thing. And I asked her, I was like, okay, time out. Like, where's the deal flow coming from, basically, right? And she was like, no, you don't understand. She's like, I am the perfect demographic for these products and services, right? Because she was in her late 20s as a woman with a friend group where word of mouth goes viral, like all this stuff. She's like, and a lot of times I would just look and see who's spending a ton of money on Facebook and Instagram ads to target me. They have money. They're spending a lot. If I see my friends then posting about it, like you can very quickly figure out, oh shit, this is becoming big.
Yep.
Right? So like, is it better to read the Wall Street research report? Is it better to talk to other old dude VCs? Or is it better to talk to my wife who literally is like getting bombarded with Instagram ads?
Yep.
Like actually she had the advantage on that specific market,
yep.
right? Now she's going to have zero clue for a business that's targeting, 30-year-old dudes, right? It's just she's not in the demographic. And so a lot of times it's like go and find the people who are organic to that community and they know, right? Yep. And so like one of my favorite things to do when I talk about a lot is like the small businesses. Go talk to like the number 2 or 3 in charge. Be like, hey, if Joe wasn't here for a month, what would you do to grow the business? And the things they tell you are like completely different than the plan, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you're like, why this? And they have like very good, well, this and this and this. And why aren't you guys doing that? Joe's got his plan. We're going to do Joe's plan. And so you're like, okay, right? Like, hey, let's have a conversation about this.
Yes.
Why is these people who are usually younger, kind of more involved in the day-to-day have a different type of plan or a variation of the plan that the business has, right? Then you go to like a tech company. And if you go and you talk to all the employees, be like, hey, if you wanted to grow the business, you want to grow the user base by 2x, what would you do? Sometimes there's overlap, right? They're providing the ideas to the company. Sometimes there's ideas and you're like, that's actually a good idea. Like, why aren't they doing that? Like, oh, I haven't told them.
Yep.
Go tell them.
Exactly.
Right? Go try it. Go experiment. And so I think that it's just, again, like ideas can come from anywhere, right? You just got to kind of really pay attention. Just double down on the good ones.
Final question I have for you is how much weight do you put, obviously I know you said you're more of a gut instinct type of person. How much weight is it for you in terms of like, hey, I'm placing my bet on the founder itself versus the idea and the market and how big it can potentially be?
Every mistake I've ever made in investing, like big mistakes, I fell in love with the idea. Every great investment I've ever made, I invested in the person.
Got it.
So I still make mistakes, right, all the time. And I'm human. I get excited about, oh, look at this massive market, whatever, right? But it's the person.
Gotcha.
It's really the person. And it's because everything is going to change, especially in the early stage, right? When somebody comes and says, hey, I got an idea. Like that's really where I spend a lot of my time. The product that they're talking about is going to change, right? The emergent strategy stuff. The market is going to change. The competitors are going to change. The funding environment, the economy, the talent market, all that stuff's going to change. The one thing that's not going to change in this business is who's running it. And really what you're trying to get at is how good of a decision maker are they? If they make good decisions, they got a shot.
Yep.
Right? Good decision doesn't mean a sane decision maker though. Right? A sane decision maker doesn't build Tesla. Doesn't build, Facebook, right? No, you need someone who is a good decision maker, but has a unique view of the world. And so you start trying to pull out some of these, kind of insights or things from people. And it goes back. It's not like I got like a scoreboard, right? Where I'm like, okay, decision making, that's a 7. Unique perspective on the world, that's a 3, right? I need a 12 to be able to invest. That's only 10, so I'm out, right? Like, no, it's just, it's kind of gut. And, it's easier for me to say gut because I've invested in so many companies now and I've seen enough of them kind of over time end up, which one's working, which ones don't. But also it's a probability game. And so if you go into it trying to avoid mistakes, you'll be a horrible investor in venture. If you go into it and you're like, I'm just looking for the grand slams and like, I know I'm going to waste a bunch of money, that's okay, right? Because the way the portfolio is constructed, that's what you're supposed to be doing.
Awesome. Well, that's basically all I have on my list. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk about.
Can I ask you one question before we end?
Of course.
What's the one thing you've learned so far? I think I'm episode 8. What's one thing that you've learned so far in the first 8 conversations?
The thing I've learned the most so far, I love learning about people's decision making skills or just thought process, and then I love correlating that to basically where they are. So like, when I ask questions, like I'm genuinely interested in terms of like, for you, when I was asking like, what do you do outside of work and stuff, you said you had no hobbies. Funny enough, I don't have other hobbies as well, right? And so like, I love learning about these little things in terms of how someone got to a decision, because it gives me context in terms of, okay, that makes sense. I'm on board. Why am I not applying that? Or it's like, oh, that makes sense. I personally don't want that. But I love knowing the decisions in terms of how someone got there. And so every time I talk to someone, I interviewed, a couple other people before you who had their own podcasts. And it's interesting because everyone has their own view of like why they're starting the podcast, how they get guests and things like that. But it's less about like who's right and who's wrong versus, the why and the decision to get there.
I think that's exactly right. Advice is only helpful if it's actually applies to your life.
Correct.
Right. And so if I told you, what you should do, you should go build out a whole TV studio and like all this stuff. You're like, that's not what we're trying to accomplish here.
Exactly.
Right? And so I think that just knowing who you are and being comfortable with what you're trying to accomplish is a great advantage in life.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Pomp. We're happy to have you, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch. So
absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.